The sky looked sick. That's the only way to describe it. Bruised purple, heavy with snow that refused to fall. The kind of sky that makes your bones ache before the cold even touches your skin. And there she stood, in the middle of that broken prairie, bent under the weight of a flour sack and a screaming baby. Her dress was stiff with dried blood at the hem, her shawl dragged through the dirt like a surrender flag. But she wasn't surrendering. Not yet. 6 children moved around her like ghosts, barefoot, sick, too quiet for kids that age. The oldest boy, maybe 10, carried an axe that looked twice his weight. The twins, barely out of diapers, clung to each other and stared at nothing. This wasn't a family anymore. This was survival. And the house behind her, it was falling apart. The door hung crooked. The porch was gone. Windows stuffed with old quilts, black with soot. 3 weeks ago, her husband had died. Fell from the barn rafters, split his skull like a melon. No preacher came. No one marked his grave. She'd dragged his body behind the smokehouse, wrapped it in a tarp, and waited for the ground to soften. But the freeze came early that year, so he stayed there, stiff as a legend, while she did what needed doing. But here's where it gets interesting. A man on horseback appeared on the ridge. She didn't look up. Too many men had passed by without stopping. Too many had slowed just long enough to count her children and spit. Strangers meant judgment. Or worse. This one stopped. He sat there on that hill like he was deciding what kind of man he wanted to be. She didn't wave, didn't want saving. She just needed to survive another day. Then the crunch of hooves on frost came closer, the sound of a man dismounting slow and careful, like he'd come to pay respect to the dead. He didn't speak at first. She heard the saddle creak, the reins jangle, the brush of dust from his coat. The children went still. She turned only when the baby let out a tired cry. He stood just shy of the steps, hat in his hands, boots caked with dried trail. His coat was worn but clean. "Ma'am," he said, like the word might fall apart in his mouth. Then his voice caught. He saw the baby, the children behind her, the cracked hands, the torn sleeves. "You don't got to carry all of it alone." Her eyes narrowed, her jaw set. "Ain't got a choice." He nodded like that was truth enough, but he didn't leave. Just stood there, hat to his chest, eyes on the dirt. Then, softer than breath, he said, "Come with me, please." Now here's the twist you didn't see coming. She stared at him for a long time. He wasn't young. There were lines in his face the wind hadn't put there. Scars on his knuckles. And grief behind his eyes that looked too much like her own. Her heart didn't stir, but her legs wobbled. The eldest boy stepped forward, small but firm, and stood beside her like a shadow. The man dropped to one knee. "I ain't here to take anything," he said to the boy. "Just figured maybe I could help you carry it." The wind picked up. For a moment, nothing else moved. She looked down at this stranger with his threadbare coat and steady hands. And something in her broke, not with noise, not with sobbing, but with a soft exhale like breath after a long drought. "You got a wagon?" Her voice cracked. He stood. "Yes, ma'am." "Then go get it. We ain't staying here another night." The wagon came at dusk. He'd left without another word, the kind of man who didn't waste time with talk when action would do. She didn't watch him go, but she listened. The hoofbeats faded into the cottonwoods like something slipping into a river. She waited until the quiet was deep again before telling the children to gather what they could carry. There wasn't much, a quilt each, a tin of beans. Her dead husband's Bible, though she hadn't read it since the funeral of her second child the year before. She took the axe from her boy's hands and wrapped it in oilcloth. The baby, sleeping against her chest, stirred as if to ask where they were going. She didn't answer. When the wagon wheels finally creaked into the clearing, the sun had already dropped behind the bluffs. The man sat high on the bench, reins loose in his hand. His coat collar was turned up. He looked at her not like a savior, not like a stranger, but like someone bracing for something holy or hard. She didn't greet him, just hoisted the children one by one into the wagon bed lined with straw and old saddle blankets. Last, she climbed up beside him, her back stiff and her eyes forward. The baby shifted and settled. The man waited a breath, maybe two, then flicked the reins. They didn't go fast. The ruts were deep, the horses old. But the rhythm of travel did something steady to her pulse. The farther the house slipped behind, the lighter her chest felt. "Name's Elijah," he said after nearly a mile of silence. She didn't answer at first. Then, "Ruth," he nodded. "You got family out this way?" "No," her voice was flat. "Buried back in Kansas." "Your husband?" She didn't look at him. "Him too." They rode another stretch in silence. The trees grew sparser, the sky wider. Stars blinked out one by one. "You always help strangers like this?" she asked. Not kindly. He scratched his beard. "Only the ones still fighting." That stung in a place she didn't know was open. She turned her face away. "You got land?" she asked instead. 80 acres north of Sand Hollow. Cabin's small. Barn needs patching, but the well's good." She nodded once. That was more than she had. But wait, here's where the story takes a darker turn. The baby stirred again, this time with a soft cry. She hushed him with practiced ease, her palm cupping his head. Elijah glanced over, his face unreadable in the dark. "What happened to him?" he asked gently. "Your husband." She hesitated. "Built the barn wrong, climbed too high, rafter gave. He didn't ask if it was an accident, didn't need to. The kind of man who built without asking for help usually fell the hardest." "He drink?" Elijah asked. Ruth glanced sideways. "You always ask so many questions." He didn't flinch. "Only the ones that matter." She thought about lying, but her hands were too tired for that. "Started drinking after the third stillbirth. By the time the frost came, I think he wanted to die." The horses plodded forward. The night pressed close. "You?" she asked. He blinked at her. "You married?" A pause, then a shake of the head. "Used to be." "What happened?" He gave a soft, bitter laugh. "Cholera in Missouri. Took her and the baby in the same week." The wind rattled the dry grass. The children shifted in the wagon bed, half asleep. "You planning on marrying again?" she asked, voice like gravel. He looked at her then, long and full. "I reckon I wasn't. Till today." She stared ahead. The road forked up ahead, one path winding toward the river, the other up into the hills. He turned toward the hills. "Why'd you stop?" she asked finally. "Why us?" Elijah's jaw clenched, then relaxed. "Saw a woman carrying 6 kids and a bag of flour like it was nothing. Figured God didn't mean for anyone to walk through hell alone." She didn't answer, but her hand, resting on the baby's back, shifted slightly toward the bench between them. Not touching, just closer. Elijah saw it and said nothing. They reached the cabin near midnight. No lantern burned in the window. There was no one to wait for them. But the moon hung low and full, washing the world in silver and ash. The cabin stood squat against the hillside, half swallowed by dark pines. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney like the breath of something just waking. Elijah stepped down first, his boots crunching over frozen dirt. He helped Ruth off the wagon, his hands calloused but gentle under her elbow. She didn't speak, but she didn't pull away either. The children, stiff and quiet, followed behind like a slow procession of ghosts. Inside, the cabin was warm, if plain. A fire popped low in the hearth, rough-hewn furniture, a table made from a sawed barn door, two beds against opposite walls. The air smelled faintly of tobacco and pine soap. "Put your young'uns wherever you like," Elijah said. "Got some venison stew in the pot. Not fresh, but hot." Ruth nodded. She unwrapped the baby first, laying him gently on the quilted bed. The others crowded around the fire, holding their hands out like they didn't trust it to last. One of the girls started to cry softly. Ruth didn't hush her. Let her cry. Let someone cry. Elijah ladled stew into mismatched tin bowls and handed them out without fanfare. The children ate slow at first, then like wolves. No one spoke. Ruth didn't eat. She just sat near the fire, her legs pulled beneath her skirt, eyes locked on the flames. Elijah poured her a bowl anyway, set it beside her with a piece of hard bread softened in lard. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "I know," she replied without looking. "You're safe here." She nodded. "I got a second bed," he said, quieter. "Won't touch a hair on your head. Ain't that kind of man." "I know," she said again. He stood there a moment, awkward in his own home. The firelight flickered across the knot in his throat as he swallowed something hard. "You can stay as long as you like, longer if it suits." Ruth turned to him then, not softened, not trusting, just seeing him, really seeing him, for the first time. His eyes were tired, his shoulders slumped like a man who'd carried too much too far. But there was a stillness in him, like stone underwater. Something solid, something not given to cracking easy. "Why me?" she asked. For the second time that day. Elijah sat down on a low stool across from her, stared into the same fire. "I seen good women wrecked by bad men, seen strong ones die too early, trying to do right by folks who wouldn't lift a finger in return. But I ain't never seen a woman carry 6 children across a winter prairie like it was just the next chore to finish." He leaned forward. "You didn't cry. You didn't beg. You didn't even flinch." She looked down. "I flinched," she whispered. He shook his head. "Not where it counted." The silence between them stretched long and warm. The children were dozing now, curled like pups near the fire. The baby let out a breath and tucked his fist against his cheek. "I'm not asking for nothing," Elijah said. "I just—" He stopped. Ruth looked at him. "You just what?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "Just ain't had someone sit quiet with me in a long time." Ruth blinked. A breath caught behind her ribs, too sore to name. She picked up the bowl of stew, ate slowly, methodically, like someone learning how again. Elijah didn't watch her, just stared into the fire like it might answer something. After a while, she said, "We can pull our weight. The boy's strong. I know how to clean game. Can cook if I got something to cook." "I don't doubt it," he said. She hesitated. "Maybe we stay through winter." He nodded. "That's good. But I ain't promising more than that." "I ain't asking," he said. Still, something passed between them. Not quite a truce, not quite hope, just the faint warmth of a door not slammed shut. Outside, snow began to fall in light, lazy flakes, the kind that hushed the earth without hurry. Ruth looked once toward the window, then back to her sleeping children. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, maybe longer, she felt the smallest stir of rest. But you think that's where this story settles? Not even close. The weeks that followed were quiet, not easy, not warm, but quiet. And in that silence, something grew, not soft, but steady. The kind of rhythm that comes from shared labor and hard-earned trust. Mornings began before the sun, cold as old bones. Ruth rose first, lighting the fire, and shaking the children from sleep. She packed them into borrowed coats and boots too big and sent them out with Elijah to feed the stock. The boy, Jonah, took to it quickly, listening close, working quiet like Elijah himself. Elijah said little, but watched much. He fixed the barn door one day with Jonah at his side, guiding the boy's hands with calm patience. Ruth stood behind the window, one hip against the counter, a dish in her hand gone cold in the water. She watched the way Elijah bent to show him a better grip, how he listened when the boy asked about nails and weight. She looked away before he could glance back. Inside, the cabin changed too, not fast, not all at once, but the air grew warmer, fuller. Ruth scrubbed the floor, beat the dust from the old quilts, baked what bread she could from coarse flour and lard. The children began to laugh again, not loud, not careless, but laughter all the same. One morning, the youngest girl came in holding a pine cone like a treasure, cheeks pink from cold, eyes bright. "There's deer tracks by the creek," she said. Elijah knelt beside her, his voice soft. "Think they'll come back?" The girl nodded solemnly. They were heading south. He smiled, slow and rare. "We'll keep watch then." At night, after the children slept, Ruth sat near the fire mending socks or boiling lye soap. Elijah sat nearby, whittling. Not always talking, but not apart. Sometimes they shared a story, brief and dry. Other times, just the sound of wind through the eaves and the crackle of flame between them. He never touched her, not once. But one night, as she dozed with the baby against her chest, her head slipped to the side. She jolted awake, heart pounding, breath shallow. Elijah looked up from his stool, hands still. He didn't move toward her, didn't speak, just met her eyes, calm and waiting, until her breath slowed again. She said nothing, but she didn't move away either. That same night, while washing up, she caught her reflection in the basin water. Her face looked different, not softer, not younger, but steadier, like someone who had not just survived, but remained. Spring came slow but sure. The snow melted into thick, heavy mud. The fields opened up, raw and waiting. Elijah began turning the earth behind the cabin with an old plow and a borrowed mule. Ruth joined him, tying her skirts high, hands blistering on the handles. One morning, she brought him a jar of creek water and stood at the edge of the field. He looked up from his work, sweat at his collar, dirt on his face. She handed him the jar. "You're burning yourself to the bone," she said. He drank deep. "Ain't the first time." She hesitated. "Won't be the last either." Their eyes met. Something in her didn't flinch this time. "You could have left," she said, almost to herself. "I could have," he said. "You didn't." "No, I didn't." He handed the jar back. Their fingers touched, brief and bare. Neither spoke of it. That night she found the axe, polished and sharpened, leaning by the door. Her boots, cracked and stiff, were lined with fur from an old pelt. She didn't ask. He didn't mention it. But when he passed her by the hearth, she let her fingers brush his wrist, just for a breath. And in that single wordless second, the ache of the last year folded back on itself, softened by the quiet possibility of what came next. Then the storm hit. The first storm of spring came sudden, like anger unspoken too long. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, thick with rain, and shot through with the kind of wind that bent trees and rattled bones. Elijah smelled it in the morning, stood on the porch with his hat low and jaw tight, watching the sky pull itself into something dangerous. "Bring in the hens," he said. "Tie down the wash line." Ruth didn't ask questions. She moved fast, calling the children, gathering what she could, securing the windows with old boards and thick rope. The boy helped Elijah lash the barn doors and pitch hay high into the loft where the calves might stay dry. By dusk, the wind hit hard, and the cabin groaned under its weight. Rain slammed sideways, trees thrashed like drowning men. Inside, they huddled by the fire, the youngest wrapped in quilts, Ruth pressed close with arms out like wings. Elijah moved among them, steady and calm, checking walls for leaks, stuffing cloth under the door. When the chimney whistled and a hard bang cracked across the roof, one of the girls shrieked. Ruth pulled her close. Her voice didn't rise, didn't break. "We're safe," she said. "We're safe now." Elijah crouched beside them. The baby reached toward him without fear, fingers splayed. He took the child gently and held him against his chest, murmuring low and firm about nothing at all, words that meant nothing and everything, the way a river speaks to stone. The storm lasted through the night. By morning it was gone. The land was wrecked. A tree had split near the barn, missing the wall by inches. The garden beds lay drowned, but no one was hurt. Ruth stood in the doorway, arms crossed tight. Her skirts were soaked at the hem. Elijah came up behind her, holding 2 steaming mugs. "Still standing," he said. She nodded. Took the mug. She didn't sip, just held it for the heat. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about planting wheat on the north slope, about fixing the west fence so the mule don't wander, about building another room on the cabin before next winter." She didn't speak. He looked at her, voice slower now. "I'd do it either way, Ruth, with you or without, but I'd rather it be with." She turned to him then. The light caught her face just enough to show how deeply tired she was. But there was something else now, not sorrow, not fear, certainty. "Elijah," she said, steady, "you're a good man. My children are fed. They're warm. They laugh again." She swallowed. "That counts more than anything I've had in years." He waited. She looked toward the hills, the fields beyond, the broken fence, the small pile of seed she'd been too afraid to waste. "I ain't made for softness," she said, "but I know work, I know hunger, and I know the shape of a man's hands when he means what he says." Elijah nodded once. "So," she said, "if you're asking, I'll say yes." "I'm asking then." "Yes." It wasn't romantic, not like in books. But when he reached out and she stepped into his arms, it felt stronger than anything she'd ever known. No music, no ceremony, just 2 souls battered by the world, still choosing. The children ran past them then, shrieking at the puddles, boots splashing mud like birds lifting from the ground. Jonah looked back once, eyes wide at the sight of his mother in Elijah's arms. He didn't say a word, just smiled. Later, Ruth knelt in the garden, turning wet earth in her hands, checking which seeds had survived. Elijah came to her side. "You think we can make it work?" he asked. She didn't look up, just pressed a seed into the ground, covered it with care. "We already are." Summer came like a slow breath after pain, heat thick and humming, days stretched wide with labor, nights soft with silence. Ruth moved through the fields with a rhythm that surprised even her. Her hands grew calloused in new ways. Her back ached different than it had before. This pain had purpose. The children thrived. Jonah helped Elijah build the fence that summer, taller and stronger than the last. The girls tended the chickens, learned to knead bread without being asked, and sang low songs under their breath as they worked. The baby took his first steps on the packed dirt floor of the cabin, while Ruth was washing clothes in the creek. When Elijah told her, she smiled. Not big, not loud, but with something deep that lasted all afternoon. One evening, Ruth stood in the kitchen stirring stew while Elijah carved a cradle near the fire. He worked slow, careful, not for show, not for speed, just the way a man does when he knows something is meant to last. She didn't ask why. She already knew. By now they shared the bed in the far corner, though no one spoke of it. The children had adjusted without question. Elijah never locked the door. Ruth no longer flinched when the wind rattled the eaves. They moved together, not like lovers born of heat, but like two branches leaning the same direction after a storm. One night, lightning flickered far off across the plains, a dry storm that never reached them. Ruth lay beside Elijah, her hand resting on his chest. "You ever think about going back?" she asked. "To Missouri." He was quiet. "Nothing left there for me. Graves and memory." She was quiet a while. Then, "Same." They listened to the thunder that never quite arrived. "I think I might be with child," she said softly. Elijah turned to look at her. His face didn't change, but his arm tightened around her shoulders. "You sure?" "No, but I know my body." He didn't speak for a long time, just lay there, his fingers tracing slow lines along her spine. "You scared?" he asked. She thought about that. "I was. Not now." "Why not?" She turned her face to his. "Because if I lose this one, I won't be alone." Elijah didn't answer with words. He kissed her forehead and held her closer and stayed awake long after she slept. The next day he brought in more lumber, started laying out a second table, repaired the cradle he'd half finished years ago, and sanded it smooth with quiet hands. The children noticed but said nothing. By harvest, Ruth was certain. Her stomach turned in the mornings. Her chest grew tender. She worked slower but did not stop. Elijah kept pace with her, never rushing, never treating her like glass. He was watchful, yes, but not overbearing. She loved him for that most of all. But then everything changed. One morning, a rider came, dust-choked, wide-eyed, and fast. A boy not much older than Jonah, wearing the badge of a county deputy. He reined in hard, dust spiraling from his boots as he dismounted. "Ma'am," he said to Ruth, out of breath. "Sir." Elijah stepped out from the barn, sleeves rolled, sweat glistening on his neck. "What is it?" he asked. The boy looked down, shifted his weight. "There's a man asking around town, asking about a woman with 6 children. Says he's her brother. Got papers, claims he's taking them back east." Ruth's blood ran cold. She set the wash bucket down and braced herself against the porch post. "What's his name?" Elijah asked. The boy glanced at Ruth. "Jebediah Mason." She stiffened. "That's my brother, or was." Elijah looked at her, careful. "You want me to go talk to him?" She shook her head slowly. "No, I'll do it." The boy blinked. "Ma'am, he don't seem the kind to take no real easy." Ruth straightened. "He never was." She looked at Elijah. "You'll stand by me?" He didn't hesitate. "I already am." She nodded once. Her jaw set. Her hand rested on the swell just beginning beneath her apron. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. They met him 2 days later in town. Jebediah Mason stood tall and lean beside a hitch team of glossy bays, dressed in a black coat too fine for a place like this. His beard was trimmed, his boots shined, but his eyes were the same as they'd always been, cold, sharp, and full of quiet judgment. He watched Ruth approach like a man sizing up a broken tool. She wore her best dress, faded blue, patched at the hip. Elijah walked beside her, his hand steady on her back. The children stayed at the edge of the street, quiet under the awning of the feed store. "Well," Jeb said with a slow drawl that didn't reach his eyes, "I'll be damned, you look worse than I figured." Ruth stopped 3 paces from him. She didn't flinch, didn't greet him. "What do you want?" she asked. He lifted a folded paper from his coat and waved it like a flag. "I'm here to bring your children home. I've got legal claim. Judge in Topeka signed off." "You're unfit, Ruth," Your husband's dead. You're squatting on land that ain't yours. You got no means, no blood kin near, and no business raising 6 children in the wild with a man who ain't your husband." Elijah didn't move, just stood behind her, a still presence. Ruth's jaw clenched. "You never cared for them when they were yours to care for. You never even wrote." Jeb smiled, thin. "Didn't figure I needed to. Figured you'd come to your senses and send for us when things got hard. You've always been proud, Ruthie. Thought you were better than the rest of us." "I am," she said. The words fell hard and flat. Jeb's smile faded. "You've got no right." "I got every right. Because I stayed. I buried them. I bled for them. I kept them fed when no one else would lift a damn finger. And they're not yours. Not by law. Not by blood. They're mine." Jeb stepped forward, his voice low. "You think the law will see it that way?" Ruth didn't back down. "I think the law don't matter here. Not if you're smart." He looked past her, then to Elijah. The look that passed between them was hard and long. "You planning to marry her?" Jeb asked. Elijah didn't blink. "Already did." That was a lie, but it landed like gospel. Ruth felt it in her bones, warm and clear. "You got papers?" Jeb asked. Elijah smiled, soft and lethal. "Got a town full of witnesses." Jeb turned to the deputy who'd brought word. The boy stood pale and uncomfortable near the telegraph office. "You vouch for that?" Jeb asked. The deputy nodded. "Saw the preacher myself. Been living together months. Raised those kids better than anyone else could." Jeb's jaw worked, but he said nothing. Ruth stepped closer, her voice even. "You can ride out now, Jeb, or you can stay and find out what happens when a whole town stands behind a woman who's got nothing left to lose." He looked at her, really looked, and something in his face cracked. "You always were the stubborn one," he said. She nodded. "And the strong one." Jeb looked down at his boots, spat once, then climbed back into his wagon. Without a word, he turned the team and rode out slow, dust rising behind him in tired swirls. He didn't look back. Ruth stood there, heart pounding. Then Elijah took her hand, not in front of her, not leading her, beside her. The children came running, shouting her name, throwing arms around her legs. Jonah stood back, but his face was lit with something like awe. She reached out and pulled him close, pressing his head to her chest. "We're going home," she said. Elijah leaned in. "For good this time." She nodded. And when the sun dipped low, casting long gold across the road, Ruth looked out across the land, not as something to fear, but as something to tend, something to build, something to pass on. The ring came 2 weeks later, wrapped in cloth, small and plain. He didn't kneel. He didn't make speeches. Just opened his hand and waited. She took it, slid it on herself, then placed her palm flat against his chest, right where his heart beat. Fall settled in quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't mean emptiness, but peace. The fields turned gold and rust. The wind lost its bite. The earth breathed slower. Days were shorter now, but each one was full. Ruth worked with a looseness in her shoulders that hadn't been there the year before. Her belly rounded, firm and sure beneath her apron. The children didn't ask about it. They simply understood. There was no grand announcement, no celebration, just days lived well. One evening, while the stew bubbled low and the children played outside in sweaters patched at the elbows, Ruth sat at the window with a length of fabric spread across her knees. It was soft, faded cotton from one of Elijah's old shirts, the one he wore the day he came for her. She'd saved it quietly, cut around the torn sleeves. Now she sewed it into something new. Tiny, slow stitches, a baby's dress. Elijah watched from the doorway, arms crossed, a quiet smile tugging at his mouth. "You making guesses?" he asked. She didn't look up. "I know." He came close, kneeling beside her, resting one hand against her knee. "And if you're wrong?" "I'm not," he chuckled. "Of course not." She didn't smile, but her hand stilled. "You ever think you'd be here like this?" His thumb brushed a thread from her skirt. "Not once, but I can't imagine being anywhere else now." The wind rattled the shutters gently. The children's laughter echoed from the yard. Ruth set the needle aside, turned to him. "I was lost," she said. "Not just after he died. Before that. I thought if I just kept moving, kept carrying the weight, something would change. But nothing ever did. Till you showed up. I didn't save you, Ruth. I know. But you stayed. They didn't kiss. Not then. They didn't need to." The warmth between them had long since moved past the need for proof. It lived in small things. The way he refilled the fire before bed, how she set his tools just where he liked, the way the children looked at him now when they were hurt or proud or unsure. Love for them was not a storm. It was shelter. By winter, the cradle sat beside their bed, waiting. The baby came on a still night, just before the snow returned. No screaming, no panic. Ruth gave birth the way she lived, with quiet, unshakable strength. Elijah held her hand through it all, never once letting go. When the child arrived, pink and wailing and strong, he caught her himself, wrapped her in the quilt Ruth had stitched from scraps. A girl, just as she'd said. Ruth held her to her chest, exhausted and glowing with a kind of joy that didn't need words. The children tiptoed in after dawn, peering close, whispering. "What's her name?" Jonah asked. Ruth looked to Elijah. He nodded. "Hope," she said. They nodded. Somehow it felt like they already knew. That night Elijah carved her name into a new beam above the hearth. The letters weren't perfect, but they were deep and clean. Hope. The wind outside howled against the dark, but inside the cabin it was warm. The fire burned steady. The children slept safe. Ruth rocked the baby in the cradle, humming something low and half-forgotten. Elijah watched her, one hand on the frame of the door, the other resting over his chest. And for the first time in his life, he felt what it meant to be home. If you made it to the end of Ruth and Elijah's story, thank you for being here. This is what survival looks like. This is what love looks like when it's stripped of everything soft and built back up from nothing but will and work. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories like this, stories of people who refused to quit, who walked through hell and came out the other side. Hit that subscribe button and join us for the next chapter.